you have an opportunity to do a quiz. If you used all 3 of your attempts to do that quiz, then that's a problem because, you know, I open it up and you still don't have any attempts there. That's not really going to help you. I warn people about that. Don't rush into it and try and guess at answers. Just go ahead and take your time and get the right answers. 3 attempts to get 5 1-point questions is, I think, plenty of opportunities there. Let's see here. Here we go. So we've been talking about the second group of psychedelics. I introduced you to mescaline, the drug that is found in the peyote cactus. I happened to be at Barnes & Noble last night, and I wasn't looking for it. I was getting another book, but I happened to see Aldous Huxley's The Doors of Perception, his essays on using mescaline and LSD, written in the 1950s to try and broaden his understanding of how the mind, human brain works. I didn't get a chance to read them, but these books were published in the 50s. I never really read The Doors of Perception and a couple of other essays that are in there, so that should be kind of interesting. So you know about mescaline, that's the natural phenylalkylamine. Introduced you to the next group, sometimes called designer psychedelics. They're synthesized purposely to enable people to get intoxicated. Sometimes they're called club drugs. If you look at structures, you can see inside that structure there's an amphetamine molecule. And there are many of these versions of these drugs produced. So I kind of explained the history of methylene dioxymethamphetamine, or ecstasy. The fact that it kind of dried up for a while in the United States when a prominent smuggler from the Netherlands was caught smuggling a large number of pills in, and actually 1.7 million ecstasy tablets. He's now serving that 20-year term in federal prison. So there were no labs making ecstasy in the United States, so there was a dry period. People were buying pills that didn't really contain ecstasy. Now, apparently, the labs are back into production. Remember, this is an illegal drug now, and people are buying things that are the drug, actually methylene dioxymethamphetamine. One of the new street names is Molly. So I had a student ask me in my class, 11:30 class yesterday, is Molly really ecstasy, the old ecstasy? And I said, from what I can tell, it is. So what people were buying before, during this dry period, might contain caffeine, amphetamine, or other things, but it wasn't actually ecstasy. Now, apparently, the pills that people are buying do actually contain this compound. I don't know exactly the amount. The normal dose is about 75, I think, to 125 milligrams here. Talked about the physical effects, very much stimulant effects, which you would expect from a drug that actually resembles amphetamine. It has an amphetamine core in it. And there have been some people that have died in the past year, I think. Their deaths have been blamed on this Molly, which people talk about as a new drug, but I think it's actually just methylene dioxymethamphetamine. And the problem is malignant hyperthermia. This drug has its mental effects by causing serotonin axon terminals to release all of their serotonin. So it's not just like LSD that's stimulating one subset of serotonin receptors. You've got a whole lot of serotonin being released. Now, serotonin does play a role in regulating body temperature. So there are cells in a part of your brain called the hypothalamus. They're stimulated by the toxins of some bacteria, and that causes you to run a fever. So a fever is just caused by these neurons in the hypothalamus responding to this toxin and raising body temperature. Your body has many set points that are regulated by these unconscious parts of the brain. CO2 levels. If it gets too high, you breathe in more oxygen. If your body temperature rises, peripheral blood vessels dilate, you start to sweat. If you're too cold, close off peripheral blood vessels, maybe shiver. So there's all these things that are automatically done by your body. So this fever that's caused by the hypothalamus can be regulated by serotonin. So people who take a drug like ecstasy can have a couple of degree rise in temperature, body temperature. Wouldn't be a big issue for a healthy person, but a lot of times these people are in a situation, they're in a club, like I mentioned the Bonham in July, downtown club. It's very hot and humid, can't cool off. Your body temperature continues to rise because you're active. The stimulant effects of the drug kind of keep you from saying, oh, I'm hot, I want to sit down, I should rest. So once you reach a certain threshold of malignant hyperthermia, your body temperature now begins to shut down parts of the nervous system. You stop sweating, you get very red, You may get disoriented and then you lose consciousness. So if you're not iced down right away, it's fatal. So that is some of the problems that this drug may produce. Talk about water toxicity, seizure activity. The big thing about the drug, of course, is there aren't any hallucinations, so it's not like mescaline. People take it for its feelings of this empathy and happiness caused by this dumping of serotonin. And so the problem is the next day you may be a little bit depleted, and you may actually have a hangover that feels like depression. So it causes this massive release. If there's a high dose, or you repeat the dose, your serotonin neurons may have actually kind of used or utilized most of what they've manufactured, and they've got to replenish their supply. So during that period of replenishment, you may be a little bit depressed, or if you're already suffering from depression and you're trying to use ecstasy to self-medicate, you really get depressed the next day. So people are driven to go back and use the drug to feel good again. But again, they've already got serotonin depleted, so they're sort of chasing their own tail. They're just going to get more and more depressed because they can't actually release much serotonin. They've released already a lot they have. They've got to wait for a while. So I wanted to mention this neurotoxicity study that came out, which really caused a lot of people to be afraid of ecstasy. And I want to tell you a little bit about that study. I read the original paper when it came out. It was done by a lab that had exposed rats and I think marmoset monkeys to doses of methylene dioxymethamphetamine. And the results of the paper were that they felt that there was a loss of serotonin axon terminals for up to 12 months after the treatment, like they'd actually died back. So and a lot of people asked me about this when this paper came out. Now, one thing I would say is that you may not realize it, but that paper has been retracted. So it got a lot of attention because this is a drug a lot of people were using. So, of course, it's going to be in the headlines everywhere. So other labs wanted to try and repeat the findings, and they couldn't. So they asked the original authors to tell them more about their procedures. And it turned out that when they were running the experiments, there may have been some mixing of methylene dioxymethamphetamine and methamphetamine and some other drugs that they were testing. So they weren't sure necessarily the dose the animals had gotten. Well, that in and of itself is enough to retract a paper from a notable journal. The other thing is they said they use the same doses that humans might be exposed to when they're partying on a weekend. But if you look at the doses, it was much higher. You can calculate it milligram per kilogram. And so I do that when I would expose rats in my lab to drugs. Most rats don't weigh more than a third of a kilogram, about 300 grams at most. And if you calculated, these people were getting larger, these animals were getting larger amounts than that. And they were giving it IV, which is not how people usually take ecstasy. So they weren't really replicating what people did. The data is very stunning because you can cause fluorescent serotonin neurons to fluoresce in brain tissue after it's, you extract the brain and all that kind of stuff. And you can see these fluorescing terminals and axons in the control study and nothing in the animals treated. So it really was that idea, is a permanent loss of serotonin neurons because they deplete their serotonin. Well, whether or not, in fact, the paper's retracted is one thing, but I've had a lot of people ask me, do you think, they get worried something they would permanently damage their brain, lost their serotonin. I think the serotonin levels are replenished, but the big problem that I fear is people who are actually depressed feel so great when they take this drug because it's just like you feel perfect, there's empathy, happiness, self-awareness, heightened self-esteem, and then when it goes away, because every drug does, you don't get just back to normal, you get super depressed because if you're already suffering from that. And you can't just keep taking the drug, to maintain a high. You know that now. Even if you did, even if you weren't losing all your serotonin, the receptors that respond to it would be desensitized because they sense they're getting too much. So there have been people probably that have been so depressed, and maybe they would get to a point of suicide. People who go into are clinically depressed, it's a fatal disease if you have a serious case of it. Most people will attempt to kill themselves. So it's not a disorder where it's just you can just lift yourself out of it. It's just a matter of telling yourself to be happy. It is a disorder of the brain, and people feel bad enough that they'd rather be dead than wake up another day. So that's the picture you should look at with clinical depression. If somebody tells you, oh, you don't need to take any treatment for it, you don't need to see a doctor, it'll go away. Well, it's not always that case. And if it's untreated, eventually people get to a point in their 50s, then nothing will work. And it actually showed some autopsies of parts of the brain actually smaller in untreated depressed people. So it's something you have to deal with if people are really suffering from it. See a doctor, talk to somebody, because some of the outcomes are fatal, suicide. So I worry more about someone doing that. I also worry about someone unexpectedly in the next year or so, because they keep synthesizing more and more of these versions of these drugs, that they're going to, maybe by accident, as they synthesize more and more of these, right now there's about 150 compounds out there, so you're not even sure what you're getting. And it's possible that somebody might, by chance, actually synthesize a neurotoxin. And they wouldn't know it until people began to suffer symptoms. So people are being pushed more and more towards using synthetic versions of psychoactive drugs, even the cannabinoids, because they're afraid of flunking a urinalysis. So, but the thing is, the synthetic cannabinoids are not as predictable as the ones that you get from the plant. And the people that are synthesizing them aren't exactly, what would you say, top-notch synthetic chemists that are working for a drug company. These are people who are doing it to make the money. And I think it would be safer for people to stick with the natural compounds that we understand from a plant like cannabinoids, instead of always trying to come up with something synthetic that the antibodies in a urinalysis test won't bind to, and therefore they can pass that test. So I'll talk a little bit more about urinalysis. We talk about marijuana here. Boy, what happened to this formatting here? That's kind of, okay, let's see if I did that myself. Or sorry about the formatting here. I just want to briefly mention this third group called antipsychedelics. These are drugs that come from plants. These are 4 plants that contain these anticholinergics. These hallucinogens are not named after their structure. They're named after what they do. They block acetylcholine receptors in the brain. So if you can remember belladonna, henbane, mandrake, datura, these are plants that have a long history with humans. They became you hear about them a lot during the what are called Middle Ages or Dark Ages in Europe. These were times when people believed in witches, possession, sorcery. The mandrake root is actually even mentioned in the Bible. It's always had very kind of mystical interpretations. Sometimes the root is actually shaped like a person, which would freak people out, the little arms and legs coming out. So they have a long history. There are some medical uses for these drugs. Wow, what in the world happened to this? I may have to go to let me go to another section. Your formatting here just got crazy. Hang on just a second. Actually, while I'm doing that, maybe I'll go ahead and ask you guys your question, and then I can get that out of the way, and then we will go ahead and I'll just go ahead and pull up another section's notes, because yours got kind of, I didn't notice this. I don't know if is that the way they printed out for you guys? Or okay, I'm sorry, then I didn't notice that somehow or other their formatting had changed. So let me go ahead and just ask your question, and then I can open up another section of these notes. No problem. Now it will work, I promise. Boy, don't prove me wrong. Don't do that. Let's see here. Because this is a question I tried to ask you on Wednesday, so I'll go ahead and do it here. Your clicker 3 should be the sum of your clicker 1, clicker 2, and clicker 3, plus any points I've added. So when people are doing these extra questions, I'm just adding it into clicker 3. Normally, you could get 30 points with, I believe it's, for you guys, 11 clicker A, 11 clicker 2, and 8 clicker 3. It's a total of 30. So if you missed some and didn't get a chance to get to 30, I've been adding in these extra questions to clicker 3. Yes, now that is missing some. Right, those numbers don't include when I would just give everybody points that had registered because this didn't work. I can't add those into that table. So I think I've done that 3 times. So that total there may be actually 6 points off from what your real total would be. Now once you hit 30, it doesn't matter. It doesn't go above that. Yes? Got it. Thank you. So when you look at that table, it's going to include everything except where I just added points because this failed. The software had failed for me. come back here. All right, so the question is open. So let me tell you what it is. I just told you this. How does the drug methylene dioxymethamphetamine, MDMA, or ecstasy, or now called Molly, produce mood changes that include euphoria and increased empathy? Empathy is that opposite of paranoia. When you're empathetic, you love yourself, you love your friends, everybody's okay. Is it A, massive blockade of serotonin receptors? Is it B, massive blockade of acetylcholine receptors? C, massive release of serotonin from axon terminals? Or D, massive release of acetylcholine from axon terminals? So the first two talk about the receptors, the postsynaptic receptors, either serotonin or acetylcholine. The last two, C and D, talk about being released from the presynaptic axon terminal. Okay. So if you remember what I was just talking about before I decided to change the notes over, I told you how this drug works. And the consequences of it is that sometimes you do have depleted levels of your neurotransmitter. So when you're voting, remember you can only have 3 results. You get a green light, your vote was recorded, a red light, I didn't get your vote, or it turns off when you try and vote, low battery. Okay? So we have 103. I'm going to set it down after a couple minutes, make sure everybody has voted. And now this will appear on that table now, because it's actually recorded by the console, and I can dump that table from the software. Can't really manipulate it much. It's just a web page that I make available to you. So we're sitting at 113, coming up on 2 minutes here. If you haven't voted, go ahead and vote. See what the answer is. If you get it wrong, make sure you don't miss it on the final, because it will be on the final. Okay, we're at 2 minutes. 114. Has everyone voted? All right. Did I hear somebody say I didn't vote? Or? Okay. So the answer is C, massive release of serotonin. Okay? So all the serotonin axons, the cell bodies are in the brainstem. The axons go out and branch hundreds of times so they can have a global influence on the cortex. And when the drug is present, ecstasy binds to a little protein on the presynaptic terminal and causes the vesicles all to dump. Pretty much everything they have, or a lot of it, and that produces this striking mood change. So 81% of you got it right. The first two are wrong because it's not the receptors. It's not like LSD, which stimulates a specific subset of serotonin receptors. This is a release of serotonin, so all the serotonin receptors would be stimulated while this is happening. And acetylcholine doesn't have anything to do with this particular drug. I just mentioned the anticholinergics as coming from that plant. All right, so know the answer, don't miss it again, and we can move on now. So that little patch did work. I'm happy about that. Let's save this. And I'll go ahead and pull up the other section. This is my Tuesday, Thursday, 8:30 section. All right. And I'll make sure you get good copies where it isn't all spread out with this formatting error. All right, so I just said, if you know the names of these plants, that's pretty much it. And you should know that people don't really party with these drugs today. It's not a pleasant hallucination. It is more like you're delirious, you're confused, then you pass out, and you don't remember anything that happened. So people really saw it as being possessed by spirits. Remember, this is the Dark Ages. People were very superstitious. They believed in witchcraft. So they were using it to either, it was used in trying to put a spell on somebody, and if enough is given, it can actually be fatal. So you can cross through number 4. It does have medical uses, but I'm not going to get into those with you. And excuse the red formatting. I had just done that the other day to remind myself of something, and I forgot to change it. What you do need to know about the anticholinergics is how they work. So again, they work by blocking acetylcholine receptors on nerve cells in the brain. So when acetylcholine neurons release their acetylcholine, it can't do its effect on the target neuron because the receptors are blocked. And that induces this delirium. And also inability to remember what happened. You may know, just from general reading, that it is a problem with acetylcholine that is the basis of Alzheimer's disease. For unknown reasons, acetylcholine neurons begin to die in the brain, and you start losing cognitive function. So that's what's going on here. Okay, and you can forget about Jimson weed. It's an example of a type that grows here in the United States, sometimes called loco weed. If cattle eat it, they get kind of crazy. Some teenagers in the United States heard about this, you can get high on it, so they actually ate part of a seed pod of Jimson weed. We all went to the emergency room. It is not a pleasant experience. You're delirious, you're salivating, well, one of the things I thought it was associated with witches is your heart rate goes up and down. You almost feel like you're flying. So that's also associated with this witchcraft thing. Okay, now we're into the 4th type of psychedelic or hallucinogen, and I'd like to talk about that with you. So this kind of has a little bit of a grab bag here because they don't fit the other sections. The first drug is called ketamine, a synthetic drug that has been used and still is used as an animal anesthetic. Now, it was developed as both human and animal anesthetic, and it was used as an anesthetic in the Vietnam War, and it's still used. I've talked to some medics that have been in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's still used sometimes then. So it's a type of anesthetic that's sometimes called atypical or dissociative. So the thing about ketamine is when you get a high enough dose, you act like you're anesthetized. You don't respond to pain. So they could patch you up on the battlefield, do a triage if you have a serious injury, yet your eyes remain open, and your heart rate and your blood pressure don't drop like normal anesthetics. So that's an advantage if you have someone that you don't want to OD them in this emergency situation on the battlefield, so you can get them out of there, helicopter them out to another field hospital. And for animals, it's useful because little animals can be OD'd so quickly. I mean, think about the vet who's working on little Fluffy, the little Chihuahua, and he ODs her. You know, what's the woman going to, oh, I'm sorry, Fluffy came in for a minor surgery, but she died. I killed her, you know. Vets don't want to deal with that. So little Chihuahuas and small animals, I mean, any animal, really, dogs, cats, you want them to not go into an overdose if their heart's stopping, their breathing stopping, because that's dangerous. So this ketamine is useful. They don't feel anything, but their eyes are open, their heart rate's stable, and their blood pressure's stable. So do the surgery, wears off, they come out of it. So there are not a lot of uses for it in humans, but it is still for people in this field medic operations, or if you are allergic to all other anesthetics, they might use ketamine. But most of it now is coming from vet pharmacies. So that's the street version of it. People steal it from vet pharmacies. They may work at a pharmacy as an assistant, or there actually was a vet pharmacy busted in South Texas, I think. They were diverting a lot of ketamine. I mean, people were just coming in and buying it, and they were doing it for party uses. They didn't have vet licenses. It's in a little multi-injection vial, little glass vial. So people would get those little glass vials. Sometimes they're one dose. It's a little ampere, you break it. Others, it is a bigger bottle. So people would evaporate the fluid in a microwave or something like that, and what's left are these little crystals of ketamine. And then those things can be, people mix them with something to smoke. They might snort them. They're mixed in drinks. And what are you guys leaving for? Where are you going? Good Friday or? Oh, okay, gotcha. I thought maybe because I'd asked the question earlier, they were like, everybody was going like, let's get out of here. Please hang with me, okay? I won't keep you long. Stay with me. So what happens is that when people use it as a club drug, now they don't want to anesthetize themselves, okay? That's not the point. But they take a dose. Apparently they can mix it. I've used ketamine in my lab for so long with the rats. I never even thought about using it or trying it as a drug, a party drug. But I don't know exactly what it feels like, but people talk about the doses they want. It might produce this kind of detached, dreamlike state, because you talk about being kind of away from your body, dissociated from your body. Then people can mix it with alcohol, marijuana. Who knows what other drug they want to take? People mix it with LSD, ecstasy. People have these weird combinations they do of certain club drugs to get the buzz they want. So there are people that actually inject ketamine IV. There are some people who become really compulsive users of it. And they actually go into this. They actually put themselves almost in an anesthetized state. They just kind of disappear for a while in terms of they're not doing anything. Talk about being in a K-hole, which is where the reality recedes, and you're kind of in this little black box, which I think would be kind of what you would call a anesthetized state. But, that's people who are really into the extreme doses there. So it does kind of reduce some pain sensation. So people have talked about using it and then bruising themselves or cutting themselves and not feeling it until the next day when they notice it. Wow, how did I do that? So it does kind of dampen some pain. Now its cousin, phencyclidine, is different. So you need to remember, ketamine is still used. Okay? Phencyclidine was also first developed as a human and vet anesthetic, but it has been taken off the market. So nobody uses phencyclidine. Well, there are some changes to reality, but it's not the kind of hallucinations that would be associated with LSD. Now, I have talked to a student who came to see me. He went to a concert in Austin, and he and his friend said that they did ketamine, and he had this intense effect. And he was talking about he was way back in the crowd, and suddenly the stage was rushing up to him and then receding. And he was looking at people, and that little effect, that it's a trick of cameras. You can swirl it so images get kind of swirled, like faces are suddenly swirled. He said that was happening to people. I don't know. The thing is, the problem is, I don't know what he really took. It's so hard to be sure that you get the drug you think you got. He said it was in some kind of a capsule. So what I think is, it's not so much the strong hallucinations, but it's more like, it's this detachment. So that you're kind of like outside yourself. Again, that some people actually like that dissociated state where nothing bothers them. I think people who want to forget about pain. There's some good quotes in your textbook about people who have used it, why they were into it, and what it felt like. But if there's changes in reality, it's more like here, sensory deprivation, mind-body separation. It's that kind of hallucination, okay? And so it is a little bit different. It's not working through the serotonin receptors. They just figured out, you guys don't have to know this, but it's working through a glutamate receptor, a neurotransmitter I haven't really talked about. So both of these work through that receptor. People have finally figured out. So the thing about phencyclidine is when they first was used as an anesthetic for people, when they woke up from anesthesia, they were very paranoid, they were frightened, they were combative in the recovery room. So people were like, that's not a very good effect. And so even vets withdrew it because they didn't want to have to deal with it. So the only source of phencyclidine today is illegal labs. So the street name PCP for phencyclidine. Another name was angel dust because a lot of labs were in Los Angeles, City of Angels. It was pretty cheap to manufacture, not that hard. People were calling it poor man's cocaine, all kinds of stuff. So, of course, it's nothing like cocaine, but it is a white powder. I think I showed you that slide. It can be in a liquid, it can be in a powder, however people are preparing it. So it's illegal, and people, again, can mix it in liquids and dip something like a joint or a cigarette in there or a little cigar. It can be snorted. People just take a tablet. Some people inject it, okay? IV use of any drug is really the most intense, probably frightening thing to do. A lot of times people do have this kind of paranoid, fearful reaction. So it seems to have a more intense effect than ketamine. It may interact with the receptors more strongly, so it's a little above in terms of what people feel. So if you think about sensory deprivation and mind-body separation, if you think about it, as an anesthetic, you normally would be unconscious, but you wouldn't feel the pain of surgery. That's the whole point of anesthetics. And here, it's like they can feel themselves kind of regressing from their body, not feeling things. Sensory deprivation, again, you're like in this little box. It's a very complicated drug, and most people should be wary of it. You know, I would not say things, I would not recommend anyone messing with it too much. People talked about low doses, moderate doses, and high doses. That's kind of hard to predict. If you want to, you can cross that out. What I do want to say about PCP is what's in red here. There was a big rumor out there. There was a policeman, I don't know what city he was in, maybe Los Angeles, who said that someone he was trying to arrest under the influence of PCP broke his handcuffs and got away because he could not be subdued. It was like he was super strong. Well, that one report kind of became a viral thing that went everywhere, that PCP could produce people that had this like superhuman strength. It even got into the movie Terminator. You all must have seen Terminator, the original Terminator, where they talk about, well, how could he not die when he was shot? Oh, it might have been on PCP. They don't feel pain and all this kind of stuff. And I think there's another movie that referenced PCP and superhuman strength. Well, first of all, no one can break handcuffs if they're put on properly. They're tensile steel. So whatever this cop says, he did not have those handcuffs on properly. Or the guy somehow, some people can actually dislocate a thumb, slip out of handcuffs, okay? So that there's nothing in the world that could say that you are now super strong. It is true that when you have a lot of adrenaline in your system, you can do things that are very intense. But even though the idea of the woman lifting the car off her son, being superhuman strong, that actually has some problems with it, okay? You know, in terms of, there's nothing that would allow you a small woman to lift a car just because she had adrenaline in her system. But, you know, those things are out there, there's rumors. But the thing is, people who are under the influence of PCP are super paranoid. So when they're being arrested, they assume the cops are trying to kill them. And when you're fighting for your life, you will fight hard, okay? Think about it. You're fighting for your life. And normally, if you hit a suspect on the bridge of the nose with a nightstick, they will go down, okay? It's very painful, or at least back up. It shocks them. There are painful subdue tactics that police use, and when these people didn't respond because their sensations of pain were reduced, again, there's that idea that they're super strong. You just can't get them to go down. So the combination of the two things, they fight violently because they think you're trying to kill them, because of the paranoid state, and they're not responding normally to painful stimulation that normally helps you subdue someone. So that's what's going on there. I want to make sure that people recognize that. The whole rumor about PCP is so funny how an event, finally people were able to trace it. Where did this ever get started? And they traced it back to a single police report that a man under the influence of PCP broke his handcuffs. And that just was all it took to get out there in the drug lore. Okay, so that's about it for PCP. It's a very long-lasting drug, longer than ketamine. A lot of people recognize that it's, you know, may not be a pleasant event, so they stay away from it. But sometimes people will buy tell them that someone says this is liquid synthetic THC, or this was synthetic mescaline, and it's actually PCP that's being sold. So again, this is a problem with these type of drugs. They're misrepresented. Okay, the last little thing in this section is a drug, a plant that I heard about 15, 20 years ago. People said, oh, Dr. Armstrong, there's this thing, they sell at Planet K, you can smoke it, you can hallucinate, it's legal, blah, blah, blah. So that's Salvia divinorum, okay. And it is a plant that's been used as a hallucinogen for hundreds of years by some medicine men or shaman in the Sierra Madre Mountains of Mexico. So they make a tea out of the plant. It's called sacred sage to them. And the shaman drinks the tea, the patient drinks the tea, and then he's able to sort of put his hands on them and find out what's wrong. Is it their liver? Is it their heart? Is there a blood problem? It's kind of like uses a medicinal diagnostic thing. So there are some hallucinations involved. The active ingredient is finally being identified. You should know this. It's called salvinorum A. So it's a whole new drug. We're not even sure what receptor it stimulates. It might actually be an endorphin receptor, which is kind of weird, a subset of endorphin receptors, but it doesn't have pain-killing effects. So what happens in the United States is people buy these little bags, and they usually roll it and smoke it. So when people smoke it, there is, of course, different from drinking the sage, and it's very fast onset from smoking it, and it's metabolized very quickly. So what people normally say is it's an intense, immediate hallucinogenic state where you lose perspective, sometimes you fall down, and then it's gone. They say that 7 to 10 minutes is way longer. They feel it's more like 2 to 3 minutes maybe, or 5 minutes at the most, and then reality returns. So this has had so much associated with it also, misinformation. Some Ohio congressman said it's the new marijuana. Where's this guy coming from? It's not at all like marijuana. It will never be like marijuana. Most people I know that have done it are like, been there, done that, don't care to do it again, okay? It's a abrupt, effect, and it's not something you could, have fun with where you go out with your friends and actually do things. So that's the whole idea. It's still being sold. They label it yellow, orange, red in terms of potency. A lot of young people will try it at least once, and in some places they've already put it on Schedule 1 or trying to, because it's, there's rumors that someone committed suicide using it. Well, there's a problem when you have people who are committing suicide that are blamed on a specific drug, because suicide is a complex thing related to clinical depression. And, once that happens, or once someone dies from who knows what combination of drugs, that is going to be a red light for most parents, police, and authorities. And I recognize that. No one wants to see a young person die for any reason. And so there have been people who have had a big campaign against the drug. As far as I know, in Texas, it's not, I haven't gotten into a Planet K in years. I don't know if they still have it. All right, so the last part of this class is going to be on marijuana. So I think it's very good. I've got a lot of new information on marijuana, how the the compounds work, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, and some of these new synthetic cannabinols that are out there, and also some comments on the social changes that have recently happened in our society concerning marijuana. So I'm going to let you go. So on Monday, we're going to start marijuana. You maybe want to look at those notes in the book a little bit. On Sunday, all the quizzes will open, and they will close on Sunday's the 20th. They will close on the 27th at 11:59. If you have not completed any by then, I'm sorry, you won't get those points. Mm-hmm.
I have 25 points on mine.
Mm-hmm. Well, you'll get 2 from today,
Right.
and there will be 28. Is your total 270 yet?
Well, when the quiz is done here, it's going to be 270.
Yeah, then once you get, you want to go ahead and get your 30 clicker points.
Right.
So you'll have 28 from, today. You said you had what? 20?
25.
Oh, 25. So you have 27. Next week there's 3 more 2-point questions. So I'm sure you can get to by.
The ones 24, did they already count into the I-53 or?
Yes, they've been added.
Okay.
So the ones from Wednesday have already been added. I've added 2 points in there. So that if you're at 25 now, you go to 27 after today, and then Monday 29, and then Wednesday 30. You'll be done. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I switched stuff out of my backpack and forgot my iClicker today. Is there any way I can still get the points?
Is this going to make a difference as whether you get 30 or not?
I have 27. So.
Yeah. You'll have it by, so right now you have 27. You would still have